listening to Surviving Parenthood, the parenting podcast, the podcast which aims to challenge the one-size-fits-all parenting story. I am Sam. My pronouns are she, her. I am forever curious about how parents survive modern-day parenting. Today, we are talking to Faye, a content writer at Twinkl, mum of a trans son, all about her parenting experience. Hi, Faye.
Hello, thank you for having me today.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. Just before we start with our quick fire round questions, obviously I've used my pronouns in that introduction, and I'm just wondering from your perspective, why it is important for us perhaps to use our pronouns and why that should be utilised.
Yeah, thank you. So it's something that possibly lots of us don't really stop to think about. Why would we? We've lived in a society, most of us grown up in a society where we use gendered pronouns, tend to just stick to he and she, and when we look at someone without even realising we're doing it, we assess whether that person is male or female, and then we assume their pronouns. But of course, we're all learning more and more at the moment that gender isn't necessarily binary. There are more than two genders, and some people may identify as a gender that isn't the gender you would necessarily assume they were, having looked at them. And that's something I've certainly learned more about, and I'm always learning more about on the sort of trans journey.
That's really interesting, and I really hope I'm just not going to pretend to know everything, because I feel like things are constantly
None of us,
shifting and
no,
changing. But I
none,
do
yeah,
want to
none of us do.
Yeah, so I do really want to learn from you and your experience. Before we get into that, can I do a quick fire round? What are you currently reading?
Yeah, great. So at the moment, I'm actually on the second book of a Margaret Atwood trilogy. She's the lady, if you didn't know, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, which I love. This trilogy is set in a sort of a dystopian, post-apocalyptic near future, but it feels very possible, as lots of those books do, where we feel like we're quite close to a not very nice world. This one is, it's about kind of genetic experimentation and pharmaceutical engineering, and as I say, doesn't feel so impossible. So that's quite cool. And I've got another book
That is
in the
very
trilogy
cool.
to read.
Oh, amazing. If you could be any type of animal, what would it be and why?
Okay, so that's easy. I love birds, and I also would be able to love to fly. That is just that for me would be the dream. So yeah, definitely a bird, one that can glide and soar. Not a seabird, because I'm not very keen on water. I'm not a strong swimmer, and I don't want the smell of fish.
Do you get seasick, Faye?
Oh, I get every kind of travel sick. So I'd like to think that if
Me
I were a
too.
bird, flying would be okay. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. What's your favourite sound?
Okay, well, I'm afraid it's a bit of a bird theme, but that I'm choosing birdsong because I do just love the sound of birdsong, especially in the summer at the moment when you're right at the end of the day and you maybe go for
Yeah.
a walk or you're just in the garden and you can still hear them. And my alarm on my phone is a bird song. It feels like a natural way to wake up in the morning.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm loving the bird theme. What is the one thing about you that surprises people?
Um, yeah, that's a really tough one. I think I'd probably go with the fact that I love roller coasters. So the higher and the faster, the better. But probably to look at me or even to know me, I'm not a really adventurous daredevil type, but I do love a roller coaster.
So you've just told me that you get travel sick. Do you not get so sick on those roller coasters? I get so crazy sick on them.
Yeah, well, no, round and round things I do. So I can't do anything
Oh yeah.
spinny. And I think perhaps if it
Yeah.
went on for longer, that would be awful. But the fact that your average roller coaster ride probably only lasts about a minute, so I think, I'm okay.
That's good to know. So, for the parents that are listening, I think the last thing we want to hear as parents is that other parents have got it together. So, what would be your most funny parenting moment or epic parenting fail, would you say?
Oh, there have been so many, as I'm sure any one of us, if we really spent some time, or if other people reminded us. I mean, I've had I've got two children, my trans son and then my daughter who's younger, and we all like to laugh about the fact that twice when my daughter was very young, a small baby, I managed to actually repeat the mistake of thinking, well, she's too young to roll. So kind of propped her up at the back of the sofa, went and hung out the washing, and came back in to find her on the floor. And I managed to do that twice. And then I think another favourite might be looking out of the kitchen window and seeing my son when he was quite small weeing in the back garden. As we'll find out later, my son is trans, as we're going to speak about. So at the time, he was referred to as she, and she was squatting in the back garden. And it just seemed odd, as the toilet was just inside. But upon questioning, that was just, well, I'm out here, why not? And I guess maybe
May
we'd
as
had to do it in a
well.
field, or maybe we'd had to do it outside at some point. So that had been logged as, well, that's fine. But it didn't really seem fine to me at the time. I think I was a bit cross.
You know what, Faye? You've just reminded me of something that I think I buried deep in my subconscious.
Uh-oh.
Oh, goodness. You know, when they're first born and they're absolutely tiny.
Yeah.
And my little girl, when she was a baby, she wanted to always be upright. So it was
Yeah.
just debilitatingly tiring because you had to
Oh.
constantly have her in an upright position. And
Yeah.
so my husband, he sort of had his knees up and she was sort of laying in his lap, if you like, with his knees
Yes.
face
Yeah.
up. She was only dead tiny. And oh God, I think he fell asleep and she sort of ended up on the floor somehow. But
Yeah. Yeah.
somehow she lived to tell the tale, so it's fine. Oh,
Exactly. Apparently they're quite sort of malleable and bouncy when they're young. I
which you
think
don't
it's
actually really realise, do you? When you first,
no,
you're like, well,
exactly.
they're next in a sort of a funny position, like, oh my God, but actually
Yeah.
they're really robust, aren't they? So,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's it.
okay, so Faye, thank you for joining us. And as you know, we are going to explore with you today your experience of raising a transgender son. So I know, Faye, that we've had a chat previously, and I know that you identify with cisgender as I do. And, you know, back then, I feel like the trans experience wasn't really talked about. And I know
Mm.
that you've said you don't have any friends that
Mm.
identify with transgender. So, how did you
Mm.
find the process experience of raising a transgender son?
Yeah, so absolutely, as you say, my son's 18 now. So if we think back, um, obviously we're all different. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people who would say otherwise, and that they've perhaps known lots about this subject for a long time, and that's fantastic. I won't pretend I did. I was already a primary school teacher, uh, but I don't think I was really aware much at all about sort of the transgender community. Um, like any parent, you are constantly learning. You really don't know what you're doing from one day to the next. It often feels you're seeking advice. You're going on the way you were raised yourself. You're looking around. You're, I don't know, maybe reading articles, reading books, looking online for advice, support, tips. Um, Obviously our experience or my experience of raising my son will be very unique to me. So by sharing that experience today, I'd love it if it helped someone else or was interesting, or somebody found it just useful to listen to. But I wouldn't for a moment try to pretend that my experience or my son's experience is necessarily truly representative of other people who are going through similar things, because we are also different. We've been brought up differently, and we parent differently. I would say my experience has been, it certainly hasn't been a negative one, but it really has been quite a challenging, difficult one. Again, perhaps, I think perhaps any parent would say parenting is a challenge. It is difficult. It's a journey full of worry and guilt, as well as all the love and laughter. That's parenting. But of course, if you do have a child that has particular special needs, or who identifies differently perhaps, or anything that you're not quite geared up for or quite prepared for, it does sort of throw a bit of a curveball. It does mean that you're perhaps questioning things more than the average parent, and feeling like you're in an unknown territory a lot of the time, which it did for us. My son is also on the autistic spectrum, which I think at times has made things more difficult for him and for us as a family. And it is hard to kind of, as I'm talking about my son, who's now 18, it's probably quite hard, even for me, let alone anyone listening, to imagine that when we sort of go back, say, 16, 17 years, I'm a young first-time parent with a daughter, with a young girl. So I didn't really think anything at the time, other than I had my first child, who was a very sad, angry baby. That just was the baby that they were. They cried a lot. They didn't sleep well. They didn't feed well. I was probably quite an anxious first-time parent. I also didn't have a really great support. I didn't have great support from my husband at the time, and actually he and I split up before my son turned 2. So it was an anxious time anyway, but I didn't for one moment at that time know that my child was probably already questioning their gender and was on the autistic spectrum, so that might pose problems with communicating their feelings, emotions, expressing their views. So yeah, I kind of think I thought I had a difficult baby and toddler, and we were just learning along together.
The Twinkl Parents Hub is full of helpful advice, activities, and ideas to support people like you. You can find stacks of content to help with your child's learning, blogs packed with fun ideas, and resources to support you and your child's health and well-being. Head to the Twinkl website, click Parents, and see how we can help you survive and thrive. Twinkl Parents, made by teachers, trusted by parents.
No, that's okay. I was just wondering, parenting is so incredibly difficult as it is, and I'm just wondering how you sort of managed your own mental health during that, how you sort of got through those extra challenges that maybe many other parents didn't or don't have to face.
Yeah, so for me it was probably absolute top of the list of support for me was my parents. That I'm close to them emotionally and geographically. They live close by. They were an amazing support for me throughout. I had lots of friends. If we'd arranged a girls' night, nobody minded if I turned up and burst into tears because things had been tough at home that night, or whatever. So surrounding yourself as much as possible with a support network, I think, is probably always what's going to be one of the best helps. I also don't mind admitting that I am and have been on antidepressants for a lot of my adult life. I find it does help me. It helps me just to cope with times when they are particularly distressing or challenging or stressful. That helps me feel like me, and stay in control and on an even keel. I did have colleagues as well. I was teaching at the time, or when I went back to the work, I was teaching, and I got on well with colleagues. So having a strong support network around you, that was my savior. And actually, as stressful as teaching was and still is, having my identity other than just mum, just a parent, and being able to step away when things were challenging at home, and being able to just switch off for a little while and go into another mode, actually was really helpful. And I should imagine other parents might find the same. I think when I first wanted to be a mum and first became a mum, I liked the idea of, wouldn't it be lovely if I could be a stay-at-home mum? And I thought that, if I'd been able to do that financially, that's what I'd have chosen. But actually, I surprised myself and realised that I needed something for me that wasn't just being parent all the time. I needed another identity, and perhaps because parenting for me, when my son was very tiny, wasn't always full of joy and laughter and easy moments, I did need that separation from being mum as well.
From being mum. And I think sometimes it's interesting how we can have like a fixed idea about how we think things will be or how we want them to be for ourselves. But I mean, I know that sometimes I can be quite inflexible with things, and I'll have like a set idea of how I want things to pan out, and then I'm just constantly surprised about the ever shifting side of things, and how I have to remind myself on a daily basis that flexibility and acceptance and openness are really the things that matter and the things that are crucial, especially when it comes to parenting. That's what I found anyway. So tell me,
definitely.
Yeah. So tell me a bit more about your son. So tell me, I mean, was it a shock moment? Was it, something that sort of evolved naturally? Tell me a bit more about the early days.
Absolutely. So, again, I'm now aware that for some parents who have a child who identifies as trans or non-binary or gay or lesbian or bisexual, I'm aware that for a lot of those young people and for their parents, there is that kind of moment of coming out or of sharing with family and friends. This is how I now choose to identify, and obviously that can be a huge shock or a difficult time for families. We didn't have that. Because it certainly was something that kind of evolved as my son grew older. So I have a really distinct memory of driving and my son being very small, about 2.5, in the back of the car, and him asking me, "Mummy, when will I get my willy?" And I didn't really think much of it and just said, "Oh no, darling, you won't, because you're a little girl and little girls don't have willies." And he burst into tears. Which, I look back now and I think, that's quite perhaps an obvious sign that was confusing and upsetting for him. But I guess I just took it as my toddler being curious about bodies and confused and from a young age as to why male and female bodies are different. And I just answered the question and kind of moved on, and that was that. Didn't really think much of it. I certainly realised quite early on that I had a child that we would have at the time and did incorrectly label as a tomboy. I thought I had a little girl who was a tomboy. So they liked Spider-Man. I think for my son's 3rd birthday, he had a Spider-Man cake. He always felt more comfortable wearing swimming trunks at the beach or in the swimming pool, and that was fine. We went with that. The toys he chose for birthdays, Christmas, or pocket money toys were traditionally stereotypical boys' toys. A car park, one birthday, and Nerf guns, and it's just that kind of stuff. He also really loved soft toys, cuddly toys. He's always loved animals, and I did choose toys as well that I thought he would like, or that I thought my daughter should like. So I think I bought along the way probably some Barbies and some Polly Pocket toys, and he probably dabbled with those as well. And things like Lego and Playmobil that obviously are certainly not toys we would put into a stereotypically sort of binary gender one way or the other. So and his friends were girls and boys. He played at nursery. His best friend at nursery was a little boy, but he was he played with different friends, and as he went started at primary school, he did play with boys and girls, and probably his best friend then through the early years of primary school was a girl. So but I remember he wanted to go to school in trousers, shirt and boys' shoes from the boys section of shoes in Clark's or wherever it was. One day he came home and asked, I think it was at the end of reception year, could he have a school dress? And I thought, oh wow, that's quite a big moment. And I got him a summer dress. He wore it once, came home and said, no, I don't want to wear that. I don't like that. And I said, oh, well, that's okay. Why did you want it? And he said, oh, to collect things in at tidy up time. So little girls often you see where they've got their skirt or their dress, and they'll they like to gather things up to tidy up at the end of the play bit of reception. And he just thought that would be fun to do, so wanted the dress for that purpose and that purpose alone. But obviously it didn't feel comfortable and right when wearing it. At this time, we still were going with, I have a daughter. We used all the pronouns she, her. They had long hair with a fringe, but long down their back that was always up in a ponytail. There were requests for haircuts, and whilst I perhaps could have been more accommodating, I wasn't against it, but I think I just had that fear of, but you might regret it, and you've got long hair and it'll be gone, and then it'll take ages to grow back. And so I think that conversation maybe came up a couple of times before I said, yeah, okay, if you're absolutely sure. And I would say around the age of about 6, I think a few things happened. So I remember my son asking, can people change their bodies? And I said, yes, some people do. Again, I didn't have much knowledge about it at the time. I just knew that, yeah, you can. And he kind of did a sort of a yes cheer of sort of relief. I remember him saying around that age, when I grow up, I don't want to be a mummy. And I said, oh, that's fine. I've got lots of friends who haven't got children. You don't have to be a mummy. He said, no, I do want children, but I want to be a daddy, not a mummy. So again, there was that kind of moment. And it was around that age that I took him to have his long hair cut. We went into the hairdressers proudly clutching an image, a photo of Troy Bolton from High School Musical fame. That's who my son wanted to look like, and the hairdresser did an awesome job, and he kind of skipped out of the hairdressers with this new hairstyle that obviously went a long way at that age to making him feel like he looked how he felt inside. The two matched better at that point. So that probably was quite a turning point. That was also when I went to the GP and said, I think we need some support. I think my child has got lots of questions. Perhaps he's confused. Behaviour was also an issue, so there was that. We did get referred to CAMHS, and by the time he was 7, might have been kind of 7.5, CAMHS had then also seen us and referred us to the gender identity support services at the Tavistock and Portman Clinic in London. So my son's been with the gender clinic since the age of 7. So in that sense, I guess we weren't left waiting around as long as some people. We did get that support because I initiated it and pushed a little bit. But it was still fairly unknown or unheard of, and certainly through his primary school years, the teachers at his school, including the Senko at the time, nobody was aware of gender dysphoria or that side of things at all, nor did the school really flag up or notice or back me when I brought it up with anything about the autism. So I think they thought that my child was a sort of a quirky tomboy who messed about in class and was easily distracted. I remember I remember the year 2 teacher at a parents' evening saying, she, because that was the pronoun we all used at the time, well, she's just like a lazy teenage boy, really, sort of slumped in her chair. But there was never that proper acknowledgement that there could be something perhaps that the school and we could all be doing to better support that child or dig a bit deeper. There were issues with toilets where as soon as he had his hair cut, he'd still be using the girls' toilets, but girls who didn't know him, who were from a different class, would say, oh no, there's a boy in the girls' toilets, and go and tell the dinner lady. And he was quite a shy, reserved person, so his friend would then explain, no, she is a girl, she's just got short hair. But that didn't sit right either for him. That he must have felt confused even by that, because it's, well, my friend's sticking up for me and I am allowed to be in here, but I don't want to be a girl, and I don't feel right being referred to as a girl, and I probably don't feel right using these toilets. But it was a difficult time. Things like Victorian Day, he went along in his chimney sweep outfit looking like a little Victorian boy, but they split the class in boys and girls like it would have been in the Victorian times and put him with the girls. They would line up on the playground at the end of playtime in a boys' line and a girls' line, so he was in the girls' line. But on a day when a supply teacher was in who didn't know him, he got told off for messing about because that teacher thought he was a boy being silly and standing in the girls' line. It was a sort of a continual mess of misconceptions and confusion and lack of understanding on everyone's part. And so many things could have been made better looking back.
So I'm wondering how that would have affected his emotional health. I know that, I did join that conference thing that you sent through, and I mean, I wasn't surprised with the statistics, but I was really sad, sad about the extra mental health challenges that those within the LGBTQ plus community face or have to face. So I'm wondering, if he felt perhaps trapped in his body, how that sat with him, how he felt about that, how he experienced that.
And actually, that phrase you've just used is a really interesting and contentious phrase, because my son has always himself, it's not anyone putting words into his head or into his mouth, excuse me, he would say that he feels like he was born into the wrong body.
Yeah.
But some health professionals, some education professionals, and certainly it's been mentioned in a piece of government guidance for primary schools and secondary schools to adhere to. That phrase, the wrong body or being trapped, people are being really discouraged from using that. And I do understand that you wouldn't want to introduce that concept to a child who was just questioning and wasn't sure and was just a bit uncertain. We don't want to sort of presume that that's how they feel and give them that vocabulary if that's not quite right. But that came from my son. He did feel that he was in the wrong body. He felt trapped. He was miserable. He was unhappy. He was self-conscious. He, again, perhaps very much linked to the autism, but he did and still does have that quite black and white thinking, that quite fixed mindset, and that fight or flight attitude to anxiety or difficult times. And throughout his life, he has spoken of, I wish I wasn't born, or it would be easier to not be here, or, oh, well, just kill yourself. And it can be uttered quite flippantly. But there are definitely times where he's felt so threatened or so challenged, not from a physical bullying point of view, or we actually haven't experienced as a family, and I think I'm right in saying that he as an individual hasn't actually experienced vindictive behaviour from peers. No bullying at school. I don't think he's had any grief over social media, but I think he personally hated the body he was in. He didn't want to see it. He didn't want to acknowledge it. He didn't want to shower because that meant seeing and acknowledging the body that didn't feel right. He certainly didn't want to join in with PE at school. He didn't want to do sports out of school, which is such a shame because that's something he loved, and he actually probably would have pursued something a bit sporty, not to a professional level, but he'd have really liked to have been in a football club and that kind of thing. But he felt he couldn't, and that was coming from him, not other people. So I appreciate that. In that sense, society isn't to blame. Nobody said he couldn't, but he felt that he didn't look like the other boys. He didn't feel like the other boys. He couldn't quite fit in and be one of the other boys, and that obviously was there all the time. But as soon as he hit puberty, that's when that kicked in tenfold. And even though primary school had been tough, secondary just was a whole different ball game. So as well as the transition to secondary, which is hard for all children, but particularly those on the autistic spectrum who find change difficult to process and deal with, on top of that, he had now a body that was developing. He did hit puberty quite early on, so he was aware of his body shape changing. Certainly, being in a changing room was not an option for him. He wasn't comfortable using the toilets at school, so he just stopped eating and drinking all day at school. And then we wonder why his academic achievements or ability was affected, because his emotional and mental well-being was so low. And as I'm saying that, I feel really guilty as a parent, which I know is our default as parents, because I look back and think, but what else could we have done? Why was his mental well-being so poor? Why weren't we helping him? But we were doing everything we could, or that we knew to do, or that we thought we could do. And I was always in at the school, and they tried to listen and tried to help. And he changed secondary schools after his first year at secondary. He didn't feel happy there. He wanted a fresh start. So we did that. But actually, I'm not sure that helped or hindered. Probably didn't really make much difference at all. I don't know. We'll never know. Because I think all the same issues for him were still present. He still wasn't quite ready to change his name, perhaps partly, again, the autism. Change is difficult for him. He was using male pronouns then, but he just didn't he didn't feel confident to answer anyone's questions. He anticipated unkind remarks, even if they actually didn't really ever occur. He lived on the edge of worrying that they would occur, or that somebody would say something, or would be mean, or would take the mickey, or would ask him a question he wasn't comfortable asking. So yeah, his teenagehood, his mental well-being and emotional well-being really wasn't great. He was prescribed antidepressants age 12 to help with anxiety and low mood, and is still on those. And he is still with CAMHS, but having turned 18 recently, he will be discharged from that service soon, which again feels crazy, because he's not emotionally, mentally, or academically like another 18-year-old right now. So he does still need that support, and we need that support as a family, but it's going to be taken away from us because on paper he's 18. And that age thing is a real issue, and it's been a problem through the gender support service, from a sort of a medical point of view as well. Like I said, he hit puberty quite early on, but currently in this country, milestones for the trans youth are age, not stage. So 12 is a sort of, this is when you are 12, you can, if you've been assessed as being sort of a person who is ready for this, it's 12 when you can start on hormone blockers. But for someone whose breasts started budding age 9, 12, or actually as my son was, nearly 13, is a little too late to be put on hormone blockers, because you've already developed breasts, you've already started your period, which was very stressful and distressing and traumatic for him. And as soon as that was all happening, really he was very angry, very frustrated, because he felt that we'd go along to these appointments, which were maybe 3-hour-long appointments a year, maybe 4 a year in London. He certainly felt that you sit there for an hour, you get asked the same questions, you go over the same stuff, and in his words, no one helps. He felt like he either wasn't being believed, like he had to convince them that he was sure of the way he felt, the way he identified. He felt that somebody, even when he was 12, he felt that somebody should be doing something to change his body, to make it the body that he felt he should have. And from what he could see, no one was doing anything to help. He's 18, and yet you could say that from 12 to 18, a third of his life has been, it's like it was wasted. It's like it's gone. His whole teenage years were not like his peers. He couldn't join in with, as I say, all the sports and PE at school. He didn't feel that he had any confidence or self-belief. He didn't feel able to form any romantic attachments or relationships with other people, which is what a lot of teenagers are doing as they start to develop and learn more about their sexuality and how they identify and who they find attractive. He felt like none of that was an option for him, and he felt that if only he could be going through puberty and developing and identifying as and looking like a boy, like all his friends were, and by that time almost all of his friends were boys, he felt that he maybe could have kind of kept up, but I think instead he felt like he was left behind, and he felt like he didn't fit in with the girls or the boys, and like he was a mix of the two, you know, as I say, that's all his perceptions. I appreciate nobody was putting those on him, and I really did try my best to have so many conversations to help support him or challenge that thinking or get him to see that other people actually won't mind if he changes his name. They'll go along with it, and you know, but he hadn't got that inner confidence, and he wasn't ready.
Yeah, I feel like with self-forgiveness as parents, I liked what you said about, you know, guilt being a default position, because no matter what your parenting story is, I feel like it's when you're wholly responsible for someone else, I feel like to have self-compassion and have self-forgiveness is one of the hardest processes. And you did do your absolute best, and you did have you did challenge your thinking, and you did rally every kind of support for him. But we all live within our own reality, and we all work with the resources that we have at the time. So
Yeah.
You know, you absolutely did an amazing job. I'm just wondering where he is now in terms of his story and his experience.
Yeah, so quite a significant few things have happened over the last couple of years, mainly because the medical interventions have taken place and been allowed to happen more recently. I mean, as his parents, we would have given our consent to any of the medical interventions available at a younger age, because we knew that he was certain of who he was, what he wanted his future to be. We would have absolutely 100% supported anything if we could have done at an earlier stage, but for all of us it was like a waiting game. So he left school 2 years ago, when he did sit his GCSEs. He only sat 5. He didn't do very well, but none of them are a pass grade. But at that time, he was awaiting fertility treatment, so that he could have eggs harvested and put into storage, so that one day he might be able to be a biological parent. That's a huge decision for anyone of that age to be making. And the process actually did happen when he was 16, nearly 17. We had to pay privately. That's not something the NHS fund, because he isn't officially infertile. It's considered a choice. So that was done, but then he was still very much, hiding away in his bedroom, which he kind of has done for the last 2 years. He's become quite recluse. He just didn't feel confident enough to be out and about in public because of his body image, his shape, the fact that it didn't match who he felt he was inside. He also started on testosterone after the fertility treatment. So when he turned around about when he turned 17, he started on the testosterone. So that's taken a while to kick in, as it does. And yeah, he for a while felt that he would have a deeper voice, have the hairy legs, but still have the upper physique and chest of a woman. And that again made him understandably feel very uncomfortable with his appearance. So in this country, you can't have top surgery. That's a double mastectomy. You can't even have the consultation until you are 18. With COVID, there's also huge waiting lists now. So actually, at the start of this year, we went to Madrid, having spent a long time researching and finding out about different surgeons who offer that surgery and would operate on someone who wasn't yet 18. So earlier this year, he had that surgery. He's since turned 18 in May. So where we are on that journey now is so far along in some respects, which is great. He's got 10 eggs in storage. He's been on testosterone for just over a year. He has the deeper voice. He has the hairier legs. He now has the chest of a man. we've come so far, and yet he has barely left his bedroom or the house for 2 years. He doesn't have a group of friends that he socialises with. He just has a few that he stays in touch with on social media, but most of the ones he stayed in touch with actually don't live that locally, so he doesn't meet up with them. So he has no social life, he has no qualifications, he's not in education, he doesn't have a job. And the big wide world is looking quite scary. He's got it in his head that his peers have moved on without him and that he's now too old for college, which again, obviously I'm challenging that thinking as much as I can and explaining that plenty of people go to college later for all different reasons, and that there are options also of things like an apprenticeship or getting a part-time job, but he and we need help with that for all those children for any reason who haven't followed the traditional go to school, get your GCSEs, go to college or do A-levels. What do those children do? And those children who've been out of education for health reasons, whether that's physical health or mental health, it seems to be really hard to find the support and advice that he so desperately needs now to start the next chapter of his life. I know for him, it's feeling like quite a scary time right now.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that things have changed so much for him. But as you say, I feel like as human beings, we just need that sense of belonging and that connection. So, as you say, it is very difficult for him. And I'm wondering what you would love to see. What kind of changes you would like to see within our system moving forward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so much could be better, and I'm sure already is better. From when he was at primary school, for example, primary schools now are probably really a lot more clued up about gender, about supporting children who are questioning or who are already identifying as a different gender from the one that they have been assigned at birth. Supporting families, working with families, listening to what the parents are saying, and their wishes or their advice, or perhaps if the parents have done some reading around it, parents can support the schools and vice versa. The health side of things, unfortunately, a lot of what we read often feels like we're going backwards instead of forwards in terms of supporting young people. There are so many challenges, and even within my son's treatment and the people he's worked with or seen, people who've been his clinicians, just within the last year, 2 of them have left, and they've sort of off the record cited the reason they've left is because they feel their hands are tied and they can't do the job they want to do, and they can't help the young people in the way they want to help because there's too much red tape and things aren't moving in the direction they need to move in with, and they're inundated. They've got too many people that they can't help them all, so the services aren't adequate currently for the amount of people who need the support, and I don't know that the knowledge and information is available as much as it needs to be. Counsellors and therapists, people who work within CAMS, it's not a criticism, but it's just a fact that they also probably don't know enough about how to support trans people or young people in the LGBTQ plus community in general, because it is a learning curve. But are they going on training courses? Are they learning more about it? Do they really know how they can help these young people with fitting in and having friendships and relationships and accepting their body for the one that it is right now, and realistically understanding the ways in which they can change it and when that will happen and what will and won't happen when they change their bodies, and not having perhaps unrealistic expectations of what can be achieved, or all those sorts of things. There still needs to be more support and more help out there, in school, in therapy, in counselling, in health system, the medical system, and for parents in general, perhaps.
So in terms of us sort of being a good ally, so I guess we've all got a responsibility, haven't we, to be inclusive and accepting, and it's the responsibility of everyone. So how can we as individuals be more supportive?
Yeah, so I'd say being as open-minded as we possibly can, and being prepared to always learn, always challenge our own thinking, our own beliefs, the stereotypes, the traditions we've grown up around, and becoming more knowledgeable ourselves about different communities, different minorities, different struggles that other people have. As parents, I think we can certainly be having conversations with people around us, including our own children, about different families, different relationships, how different people identify, just about differences and diversity, and celebrating that. We can respect people's pronouns. We introduced you introduced yourself with your pronouns at the start of this, and certainly more companies and more meetings are beginning to be like that. That means we're inclusive of everybody, and it isn't just people who do identify as non-binary or trans sharing their pronouns. But if we're all doing it, then nobody feels like they're different. And that could be in a teacher parent sort of meeting up at the school. It could be in the parents fundraising committee at your child's school, and you could make sure that people are sharing pronouns or talking about other people's partners as partners, and not assuming somebody has a husband or a wife. So we can be allies in just our general language, vocabulary, our acceptance, our open-mindedness. We can certainly celebrate or actively learn more about or teach our children about Pride Month or LGBT History Month, and encourage our children's schools to do the same. And we can read inclusive stories. There are lots of lovely, wonderful picture books to share with younger children, so that children just feel safe and secure, so that they feel they can ask questions, whether that's at home or in school, so that they maybe if they are questioning something themselves about their own identity, then they feel they can share that and talk about it. Or if someone in their class, or their best friend's brother or sister might suddenly announce, or that they might find out that their friend's sibling is trans or something like that, and if they've got that little bit of awareness already, that can only be a good thing, really. So I think being an ally is perhaps about educating ourselves and others, and gently challenging misconceptions or fixed mindsets about certain things, whether that's certain minority groups or gender being non-binary.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. So education is absolutely key there. Just before I let you go, Faye, can I just ask you about gender stereotypes?
Absolutely.
So, just for the parents that are listening, I'm aware that some of them might be looking to raise their children beyond gender stereotypes. I know that when I had my daughter, I sort of went in with the mindset that I wouldn't be too emphatic on this, like girls should be kind, girls should be caring, girls should like pink, girls shouldn't feel anger. The model that we're presented with, the feminine archetypal model. And then there's, the boys should be tough, and boys are the ones that like dinosaurs and cars. So I sort of went into it thinking that I would like them to have the freedom to explore their own way through this without pushing my ideal onto it. I mean, it's very inconsistent, I've got to say, because all of every aspect of my parenting is inconsistent because we're not the same people every day. It depends on lots of things, like what's happened to me that day, what kind of where I'm in my cycle. It can be absolutely anything that influences how I feel and how I react to other people. But so in no way do I want to present a perfect way of doing things, but that was just my perception. That, and you know, as a result, I do feel like my little girl, who is now 9, she's not so little anymore, but she is very feisty. She's, you know, quite courageous. She's not sort of the girl in the pigtails that wears pink. You know, sometimes she does those things. She dabbles, she goes in and out, but it doesn't define her. And my boy is quite sensitive. I mean, he does cry a lot. And I have thought, you know, when I was thinking about this interview, and I did think, actually, I probably am treating them unfairly in a way, because my little boy has got extra needs, he's Zen, and I feel like he jumps from feeling quite at home within himself to feeling very upset. There's sort of no sort of gateway, if you like. It's just a straight jump. So I think he's probably more emotional and expressive than my little girl, just because she's always been a little bit better at managing her feelings. But I did think, actually, I probably do tell my son not to cry as much. You know, sometimes I think towards the end of the day, I think, gosh, you know, if it's been a hard day, I probably do come out with something like that. But I just need to, you know, it is about being imperfect, and I always pull myself back, and I think, you know what, that's not helpful. Do I need to say this right now? Is this useful? And then every day start again with hopefully a fresh perspective. But in terms of the gender stereotypes, I'm just wondering, for any parents out there that are looking to educate themselves on that, if you have any thoughts or feelings.
I think perhaps, literally, you know, I would never you know, suggest that I'm any kind of an expert, but I wonder, over my many years of being alive, and of being a teacher, and now being a content writer at Twinkl, and having to think about these things a lot, and then certainly because of being a parent to a trans child, and that's, you know, made me question things more. I think perhaps that many of us, I include myself in this, are aware of some stereotypes, and we're good at trying to not, but, you know, adhere to those. So that might be, as you said, certainly things like certain colours being stereotypically linked to boys or girls, and toys and clothing. But I wonder if we're, as a society, as good at identifying and challenging in others and in ourselves the less obvious stereotypes, and they will be the things like the language we use, and as you say, the way we speak to boys and girls, probably even our body language, the way we react, as you say, if a boy or a girl falls and hurts themselves, the way we ask for a boy or a girl to help us with a job in the classroom or at home. Again, I often slip into my teacher mode rather than my parent mode. But you know, I know as a teacher, you might say, all right, you know, I need a couple of big strong boys to help me carry these desks. Well, why? Why do we need big strong boys? Why can't any child that's got muscles and enough strength help? And we fall into those traps, and perhaps we're less aware of those sorts of stereotypes. We're probably a bit more on the ball with knowing that boys can have long hair and girls can join the football team, and as a society we really are getting so much better at challenging stereotypes, but perhaps we need to fine-tune it a bit more, and look a bit more deeply at the stereotypes we're all adhering to without realizing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I feel like that's really helpful that you said that, and you saying that I will, endeavour to be even more aware of you know, even the non-verbal, as you say, the body language,
Mm,
those kind of stereotypes, and the way we speak to boys and girls. I think that's incredibly helpful to push it that bit further and to
mm.
really look at the way that we are. Um, yeah, the way that we're talking to children. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. So, Faye, thank you for joining us. Is there anything else that you wanted to say or talk about today? Do you feel as
Uh,
though we're...
yeah, no, just a huge thank you for having me on. I hope anyone who's listened has found it either interesting or helpful, or maybe learnt a little of something, or maybe it's got them thinking a little bit.
Yeah.
I think we're heading in the right direction in terms of supporting LGBTQ plus young people. I think, yeah, there's lots more we could do. And just as a parent to parent, I'd just say keep being supportive, keep being loving, keep being honest, keep communication open, and make sure that they know they can always talk to you about anything. Don't be afraid to say you don't know the answer. Find out together. Don't be afraid to say, I got that wrong, or admit to them that you wish you'd done something
Mm.
differently. But also, don't keep beating yourself up about all the things that you would perhaps have done differently in hindsight, because you did the best you could at the time with what you knew then. And we can't live in the past, and we can't live full of regrets, so we need to just keep moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. Peace can only really exist in the present moment. So by always using our past and future references, then we're only going to, ruin our own experience on this earth. So thank you so much
Mm,
today, Faye, and for being so
thank you.
kind and open and generous with your sharings. And I really hope I get to speak to you soon. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Take care.